My name is Jessica, and until 3 months ago, I thought I knew everything about my father, Robert. He was a quiet man who spent most of his time in his workshop behind our house in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The sound of his power tools humming late into the night was the soundtrack of my childhood. When neighbors asked what he was building, he'd just smile and say, "Projects." After the funeral, I couldn't bring myself to enter that workshop. The mortgage was crushing me, and Mom's medical bills from her final years had drained everything. The realtor, Mrs. Patterson, suggested I clear out the workshop to increase the property value. "Storage spaces sell houses," she said with that practiced smile. "Before I tell you how I discovered the horrifying truth about my father's secret life, please take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy stories about family secrets that change everything. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Drop a comment below. I read every single one. Now, let me take you back to that Tuesday morning when I finally worked up the courage to unlock Dad's workshop door. Growing up, that space was strictly off limits. "Dad's working," Mom would say whenever I asked to see what he was building. "He needs quiet to concentrate." I remember pressing my ear to the workshop door as a 7-year-old, listening to the rhythmic sounds of hammering and sawing. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses through the dusty windows of Dad hunched over a workbench, his face intense with concentration. But whenever I knocked, he'd quickly cover whatever he was working on with a tarp before letting me in. "Someday you'll understand," he'd tell me, ruffling my hair. "When you're older, I'll show you everything." That someday never came. Dad died of a massive heart attack on a Tuesday morning while I was at work in Des Moines. By the time I made the hour drive home, the paramedics were already loading his body into the ambulance. The workshop door was wide open, which struck me as odd since Dad always kept it locked. What I found next changed everything I thought I knew about my life. Behind Rebecca's photograph, tucked in a manila envelope marked "Jessica Important," was a birth certificate I'd never seen before. My birth certificate. But the father's name wasn't Robert Davis. I read David Morrison. In clear black ink, I stared at the document, my hands trembling. Who was David Morrison? Why had I grown up believing Robert was my biological father? The birth date was correct, June 15th, 1995, but everything else felt wrong. Stapled to the birth certificate was a yellowed newspaper clipping from the Cedar Rapids Gazette, dated March 12, 1999. The headline read, "Local businessman dies in highway accident." The photograph showed a man with kind eyes and dark hair, maybe 30 years old. David Morrison, survived by his pregnant wife, Rebecca. I counted backwards from my birth date. David Morrison had died exactly 3 months before I was born. Why throat constricted as the implications hit me. If David Morrison was my father, and he died before I was born, how had I ended up with Robert Davis? How had Rebecca Morrison, my third-grade teacher, become separated from her own daughter? I found more documents in the envelope. David's death certificate listed the cause as single vehicle accident, Highway 30, Cedar Rapids. But there was a handwritten note in the margin. Investigation ongoing. Suspicious circumstances 24 years later, and the case was still marked suspicious. An insurance document showed David had a $300,000 life insurance policy with Rebecca Morrison listed as the beneficiary. But there was a red stamp across the front. Claim disputed. Under investigation. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Patterson. "Found any family heirlooms yet? Some items can be quite valuable." The message felt different now, loaded with meaning I couldn't quite grasp. I ignored her text and kept searching through the papers. At the bottom of the envelope was a handwritten letter, never sent, addressed to my daughter Jessica. The handwriting was feminine, careful. "If you're reading this, it means something has happened to me. Your real father was David Morrison, the most wonderful man who ever lived. He died in a car accident when I was 7 months pregnant with you. I know Robert Davis told you I abandoned you, but that's not true. I've been trying to get you back your entire life. I stayed away to protect you from the man who killed your father I love you more than you'll ever know. Your mother, Rebecca Morrison. The letter was dated just 6 months ago. Rebecca had been alive 6 months ago. She'd known where I was, who I was. She'd been watching me from a distance. And she'd suspected Robert was dangerous enough to kill her for it. I sank to the floor of the secret room, surrounded by evidence that my entire life had been built on lies. The man I'd called Dad wasn't my father. The woman I'd thought abandoned me had actually been trying to save me. And somehow, both of my real parents were dead under suspicious circumstances. The walls of the secret room seemed to close in around me. Every photograph of Rebecca took on new meaning. These weren't the obsessive photos of a stalker. They were the desperate documentation of a mother trying to stay connected to her stolen child. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of everything. The birth certificate, the newspaper clipping, Rebecca's letter. I needed proof of what I'd found because part of me couldn't believe it was real. I stood to leave the room. One final document caught my eye. It was wedged behind the desk, almost hidden. A business partnership agreement between David Morrison and Robert Davis, dated 1998. Morrison Construction Company, they'd called it. Equal partners, best friends according to the photo attached showing them shaking hands at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Robert had been David's business partner, David's friend. And somehow, after David died, Robert had ended up with David's wife, David's child, and probably David's half of the business too. The coincidences were too many to ignore. I was looking at 24 years of carefully planned theft, not just of money or property, but of an entire family's life. I spent the next 3 days researching everything I could find about David Morrison's death. What I discovered made my stomach turn. The accident report was public record. David's car had gone off Highway 30 on a rainy March night, wrapping around an oak tree at 11:47 p.m. He'd been driving home from a business meeting in Iowa City. The investigating officer noted several troubling details. No skid marks suggesting David never tried to brake, no mechanical failure found, and David's blood alcohol level was 0 despite the crash occurring after he'd attended a business dinner. Most concerning was a toxicology report that showed traces of lorazepam in David's system, a powerful sedative he'd never been prescribed. The levels weren't enough to kill him, but they would have made him dangerously drowsy while driving. Detective Ray Coleman had been the lead investigator. I found his interview notes in the newspaper archives. Mr. Morrison was a cautious driver who knew that road like the back of his hand. Coleman was quoted as saying, "The presence of an unprescribed sedative raises serious questions about what happened that night, but the case had gone cold." David's death was officially ruled accidental, though Detective Coleman continued investigating until his retirement in 2010. His final report, which I found through a Freedom of Information request, concluded, insufficient evidence to prove foul play, but circumstances remain highly suspicious. Recommend case remain open. I researched Robert's whereabouts on the night of David's death. According to his statement to police, he'd been home with his wife Carol watching a movie. But when I cross-referenced local newspaper archives, I found something interesting. The Cedar Rapids Community Theater had performed Our Town that evening, the same play Carol Davis had been involved in for months. The performance ran from 7:30 to 10:15 p.m., which would have given Robert plenty of time to drive to Iowa City, drug David's drink during their business meeting, then follow him onto the highway. But Robert's alibi held. Carol confirmed he'd been home all evening. She'd sworn to it under oath. I found Rebecca's employment records next. She'd been teaching at Lincoln Elementary when David died, but she'd taken maternity leave 2 weeks before the accident. After David's death, she'd moved to Des Moines to live with her sister, Linda Morrison. But according to school district records, Rebecca had only stayed there 6 months before moving again, this time to Portland, Oregon she'd been running. And now I understood why I discovered the custody records that explained how I'd ended up with Robert. 3 weeks after David's death, Rebecca had suffered what the court documents called a nervous breakdown due to grief and stress. She'd been hospitalized for severe depression and anxiety. During her hospitalization, Robert and Carol Davis had petitioned for temporary guardianship of me. Claiming they were family friends concerned about my welfare, the petition was granted. I was placed with the Devises temporarily while Rebecca recovered, but she never got me back. Court records showed Rebecca had tried to regain custody multiple times over the years. Each time, Robert's lawyer argued she was emotionally unstable and unable to provide a stable home environment. They produced medical records showing her continued treatment for anxiety and depression, conditions that had started after David's death and my removal from her care. It was a perfect trap. Rebecca's grief over losing David and losing me had created the very mental health issues Robert used to justify keeping me away from her. I found phone records from 2001 through 2010 showing Rebecca had tried to contact me dozens of times. Calls to the Davis house that had gone unanswered. Letters sent to my school that were returned to sender. Birthday cards mailed to my address that never reached me. Robert had systematically cut off all contact between Rebecca and me, then used her desperation to see me as evidence she was an unfit mother. The insurance money from David's policy had never been claimed. Rebecca had refused to take it, according to the insurance company records I found. When I called to ask why, a representative explained that Rebecca Morrison had told them she wouldn't take blood money and didn't trust the circumstances of her husband's death she'd known. Even 24 years ago, Rebecca had suspected Robert was involved in David's death. By 2015, Rebecca had stopped trying to contact me through official channels. That's when the surveillance photos in Robert's workshop began. She'd started watching me from a distance instead, documenting my life through telephoto lenses and private investigators. The woman I'd thought was stalking me had actually been a mother, desperately trying to stay connected to her stolen daughter. The final pieces of the puzzle came together when I found Robert's financial records hidden in a safety deposit box. The key had been taped under his desk drawer in the workshop. Inside the box were bank statements, business documents, and insurance policies that painted a picture of carefully planned murder and theft spanning over 2 decades. After David's death, Robert had purchased David's half of Morrison Construction for $50,000, a fraction of what it was worth. Rebecca had signed the papers while still hospitalized for depression, essentially giving away her husband's business for pennies on the dollar, but that was just the beginning. Over the years, Robert had systematically acquired every asset David and Rebecca had owned. Their house sold at auction when Rebecca couldn't make the mortgage payments from Portland. David's truck and tools, purchased by Robert from the estate sale. Even David's life insurance policy. When Rebecca never claimed it, the insurance company had eventually paid it to me as David's heir. But since I was a minor in Robert's custody, he'd managed the money he'd stolen my inheritance and used it to build his own wealth. I found love letters Robert had written to Rebecca but never sent, dating back to 1997, before she'd married David. The letters revealed a man obsessed with a woman who'd chosen his best friend over him. "I see the way you look at David," one letter read, "but he doesn't appreciate you like I would. He takes you for granted. Someday you'll realize you chose the wrong man." Another letter, dated just days before David's death, was more threatening. "I've waited long enough, Rebecca. I've watched him have everything I wanted. The business success, the beautiful wife, the perfect life. It's my turn now." The most chilling document was a detailed plan titled after David. It outlined how Robert would comfort Rebecca after her husband's tragic accident, help her with the business affairs, and gradually become indispensable to her and the baby. When she rejected his advances, the plan shifted to acquiring custody of me and using me as leverage to force Rebecca back into his life. "She'll come back for Jessica," the plan concluded. Mothers always come back for their children, but Rebecca hadn't come back. She'd stayed away, sacrificing her relationship with me to keep us both safe from Robert's obsession. It must have been the hardest decision of her life. I found phone records showing Robert had hired private investigators to track Rebecca's movements over the years. Every time she'd moved, every job change, every apartment, he'd known about all of it. The photos in his workshop weren't just surveillance from recent years. He'd been watching Rebecca for over 2 decades. The timeline became clear. Robert had killed David to eliminate his rival. He'd manipulated the legal system to steal David's child and business. When Rebecca refused to return to him, he'd spent years hunting her, waiting for the right moment to eliminate her permanently. That moment came when I turned 28 and started asking questions about my birth family. Rebecca must have realized I was getting older, more curious about my origins. Maybe she'd been planning to contact me directly. Robert couldn't risk losing control of the narrative he'd spent decades building. Carol's death certificate from 2 years ago listed the cause as natural causes, heart failure. But looking at it now, with everything I knew about Robert's methods, I wondered if she'd started asking too many questions about my parentage. Had she figured out the truth about David's death? Had she threatened to expose Robert? The man who'd raised me wasn't just a murderer. He was a methodical killer who destroyed multiple families to get what he wanted. And now I understood why Rebecca had died exactly 1 week after Robert's heart attack. It hadn't been a coincidence or bad timing. It had been Robert's final act of vengeance, arranged before his own death to ensure Rebecca could never tell me the truth. I couldn't put off calling the Portland police any longer. The evidence I'd found was too significant to ignore, and if Robert had accomplices still alive, I needed protection. Detective Sarah Williams answered on the second ring when I called the number I'd found in Rebecca's case file online. Portland Police, Detective Williams speaking. Detective Williams, my name is Jessica Davis, but I think my real name is Jessica Morrison. I'm calling about Rebecca Morrison's murder case. There was a pause. Jessica Morrison? Rebecca's daughter. You know about me. We've been looking for you for 8 months. Rebecca mentioned you constantly. She had photos of you everywhere in her apartment. We knew she had a daughter who'd been taken from her, but we couldn't locate you. Where are you calling from? Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I just discovered that I found evidence that my adoptive father, Robert Davis, killed Rebecca. And I think he killed my biological father, David Morrison, 24 years ago, Robert Davis. Detective Williams repeated the name slowly. Hold on. Let me pull up our files that I heard typing in the background at MS. Morrison, we've been trying to track down Robert Davis since Rebecca's death. His name appeared multiple times in our investigation. Hotel records show he was in Portland the week Rebecca was killed. We have witness statements placing a man matching his description in her neighborhood. Credit card receipts from local stores. Y hand started shaking. He really did kill her, don't we believe so? The problem was, by the time we identified him as our primary suspect, he was already dead. Heart attack, according to the Cedar Rapids obituary we found. But now that you're calling, I found a room hidden in his workshop, I interrupted. Photographs of Rebecca spanning 20 years. Maps of her house in Portland with security camera locations marked. A plane ticket for 2 days after his heart attack. He was planning to kill her even while dying. Can you secure that evidence? We'll need everything for our investigation. That there's more, I continued. I found documents suggesting he killed my biological father in 1999. Made it look like a car accident. Detective Williams was quiet for a long moment. Ms. Morrison, I need to ask you something important. Do you believe you might currently be in danger? The question caught me off guard. Danger from who? Robert's dead. Men like Robert Davis rarely work alone, especially for operations spanning decades. Someone helped him track Rebecca's movements. Someone provided him with current information about her life, her address, her routine. That person is still alive. I thought about Mrs. Patterson's persistent questions about valuable items in the house. Her unusual interest in what I'd found in Robert's belongings. The realtor, I said quietly. She's been asking strange questions about what I found in his workshop. What's her name? Elena Patterson. She's handling the sale of the house. More typing. Ms. Morrison, we can't find any Elena Patterson license to sell real estate in Iowa. Can you describe her? Blonde, maybe 55, drives a white Lexus. She knew details about the property values, about comparable sales in the area. Anyone can research property records online. Ms. Morrison, I need you to listen carefully. Do not meet with this woman again. Do not go back to that house alone. And do not let her know that you've discovered Robert's secrets. But all the evidence is in the workshop. We'll coordinate with local law enforcement to secure the scene. But right now, your safety is our priority. Is there somewhere else you can stay tonight? Someone you trust? I looked around the house where I'd grown up, suddenly seeing it as a crime scene rather than a home. I don't know who I can trust anymore. I'm going to give you a number for our victim services coordinator. I know this sounds extreme, but until we understand who else was involved in Robert's activities, you could be in serious danger. These people killed 3 members of your family. They won't hesitate to kill you too if they think you're a threat. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen where Robert had made me breakfast every morning for 20 years. The man who'd taught me to ride a bike, helped me with homework, and walked me down the aisle at my high school graduation had been a killer. He'd murdered my real father, stolen me from my mother, and spent decades terrorizing the woman who'd given birth to me. And someone was still out there, continuing his work. Through the kitchen window, I saw a white Lexus pulling into my driveway. The white Lexus sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before Mrs. Patterson finally got out. I watched from behind the kitchen curtains as she walked slowly around the property, taking photos with her phone and making notes in a small notebook. When she knocked on the front door, I pretended not to be home. After she left, I went outside to examine where her car had been parked. The tire tracks were clear in the soft dirt of my driveway, but as I looked closer, I noticed something strange. There were older tracks underneath hers, the same tread pattern, but weathered by several days of rain, misses. Patterson had been coming to my house when I wasn't home. Over the next week, I started paying closer attention to my surroundings. Every morning, I'd check the driveway for new tracks. Every evening, I'd walk the perimeter of the property, looking for signs of disturbance. What I found made my skin crawl: fresh footprints in the garden soil beneath my bedroom window. Cigarette butts by the back fence that weren't mine. A small section of the workshop's back wall where someone had clearly tried to pry off the siding, probably looking for another way into the hidden room that I installed a security camera system, spending my dwindling savings on 4 cameras that would record everything around the house. But when I reviewed the footage each morning, the cameras showed nothing unusual, just empty driveways and quiet yards. Yet the tracks kept appearing that MY neighbor, Mrs. Chin, mentioned seeing a white car parked down the street several times in the past month, usually around 2 or 3 in the morning, she told me over the fence. I thought maybe someone was having car trouble, but it was always gone by morning point 2 or 3 in the morning. The exact times when someone could watch my house without being noticed, when the security camera's motion sensors would be less likely to trigger on a stationary vehicle half a block away. The phone calls started 3 days after I'd spoken to Detective Williams. My phone would ring at random times throughout the day and night. When I answered, there would be silence for 10 or 15 seconds. Then the line would go dead. The caller ID always showed unknown number. At first, I assumed they were spam calls or wrong numbers. But they always came in clusters, 5 or 6 calls over the span of an hour, then nothing for days. It felt deliberate, like someone testing whether I was home, whether I would answer that I started screening all my calls. But that only made the anxiety worse. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would race. Every unknown number felt like a threat. Walking to the mailbox became an ordeal. I'd scan the street for that white Lexus, checking over my shoulder constantly. The grocery store felt dangerous. Too many strangers, too many places for someone to hide and watch me. I started doing all my shopping online, having everything delivered. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of the old house settling made me bolt upright, listening for footsteps that never came. I moved a baseball bat next to my bed and downloaded a security app that would let me monitor the cameras from my phone. But the cameras kept showing nothing, while the evidence of surveillance kept mounting that I found a small device attached to the underside of my car's rear bumper. a GPS tracker no bigger than a pack of gum. When I pulled it off and searched for the model number online, I discovered it was military-grade equipment, the kind used by private investigators and law enforcement. Someone had been tracking my every movement for weeks, maybe months. The paranoia was eating me alive. I'd catch myself checking locks 3 or 4 times before bed, peering through blinds at every small sound from outside. When deliveries came to the door, I'd wait 15 minutes to make sure the driver had really left before opening it. Detective Williams had warned me that Robert's accomplices might view me as a threat, but I'd assumed that meant they'd confront me directly if they were going to act. I hadn't expected this slow-burn psychological warfare, this constant sense of being watched and hunted. The worst part was not knowing who I was hiding from or what they wanted. Were they looking for evidence from Robert's workshop? Were they planning to eliminate me like they'd eliminated Rebecca? Or were they just trying to drive me crazy with fear? By the end of the week, I was jumping at shadows and sleeping with all the lights on. I'd lost 8 pounds because my stomach was too knotted with anxiety to eat. Every time I tried to call Detective Williams for reassurance, her phone went straight to voicemail that I was completely alone, trapped in a house that no longer felt safe, waiting for an enemy I couldn't identify to make their next move. The waiting was almost worse than whatever they were planning to do to me. The break-in happened on a Tuesday night at 2:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I was lying awake staring at the clock on my phone. Unable to sleep despite the exhaustion that had become my constant companion, the sound came from downstairs, a soft scraping noise like metal against wood. At first, I thought it might be a tree branch scratching against a siding, but then I heard it again, deliberate, rhythmic. Someone was trying to pry open the back door. My hands shook as I opened the security app on my phone. The camera feeds showed empty views of the front yard and driveway, but the back cameras, the ones that should have shown the rear door, displayed only black screens. Someone had disabled them. I grabbed the baseball bat from beside my bed and crept to the top of the stairs. The scraping had stopped, but now I could hear new sounds. Footsteps on the kitchen linoleum, the soft squeak of the refrigerator door opening and closing. Whoever was inside wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. They knew I was home. They knew I was awake. And they didn't care. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers, whispering my address to the dispatcher. "Someone's in my house," I breathed into the phone. "I'm upstairs hiding. Please hurry." "Officers are on their way," the dispatcher assured me. "Stay on the line and try to remain calm." But remaining calm was impossible when I heard the intruder moving through the house below me, opening closets, pulling out drawers. They weren't stealing electronics or jewelry. They were searching for something specific. Footsteps moved toward the front of the house. Then I heard the front door creak open. For a moment, I thought they were leaving. Then I realized they were just unlocking it for easier escape. The workshop. They were going to the workshop. From my bedroom window, I could see the small building behind the house. A flashlight beam swept across the windows, and I watched as someone, a figure in dark clothing, forced open the workshop door and disappeared inside. "They're in the workshop now," I whispered to the dispatcher. "There's evidence in there, important evidence about a murder case. Ma'am, I need you to stay in the house and away from the windows. Officers are 2 minutes out." But I couldn't stop watching as the flashlight beam moved through the workshop, finally disappearing toward the back wall where I knew the hidden room was located. They knew exactly where to go. They knew about the secret space, about the photographs and documents. This wasn't a random break-in. This was someone with intimate knowledge of Robert's secrets. The police sirens seemed to take forever to reach my street, though it was probably only minutes. 2 squad cars pulled up with their emergency lights flashing, and I watched from upstairs as 4 officers approached the house with their weapons drawn. "Cedar Rapids police!" one of them shouted. "Buildings surrounded." The flashlight in the workshop went dark immediately. I heard running footsteps and the sound of something crashing. Probably the intruder knocking over tools or furniture in their rush to escape. By the time the officers cleared the house and made it to the workshop, whoever had broken in was gone. But the damage was extensive. The hidden room had been torn apart. Photographs were scattered across the floor, filing cabinets overturned, papers everywhere. Officer Martinez, the senior officer on scene, found me sitting on my front porch in my pajamas, still clutching the baseball bat. The intruder knew about the hidden room, I told him. They went straight to it. This wasn't a random burglary. Someone sent them to find specific information. What kind of information? I explained about Rebecca Morrison's murder case, about the evidence I'd found linking Robert to her death and to my biological father's suspicious accident 24 years ago. Officer Martinez listened with growing concern. Ma'am, this sounds like it's connected to an active homicide investigation. I need to make some calls. Within hours, Detective Williams was on a plane from Portland. She arrived the next morning looking grim and carrying a thick file folder. "Jessica, we need to talk," she said as soon as she walked into my house. "What happened here last night confirms our worst fears. You're not safe, and you haven't been safe since the day you found that workshop." Detective Williams spread photographs and documents across my kitchen table, creating a timeline that stretched back over 2 decades. The full scope of Robert's crimes was even worse than I'd imagined. "We've been building this case for 8 months, she began. Rebecca Morrison's death wasn't just revenge for rejecting Robert's advances. It was the culmination of a 24-year campaign of terror, manipulation, and murder. The first photograph showed David Morrison's car wrapped around the oak tree on Highway 30. Detective Williams pointed to details I'd missed in the newspaper coverage. Skid marks that stopped abruptly, suggesting David had been unconscious when his foot came off the brake pedal. The lorazepam in David's system came from his own prescription, but in doses that would have rendered him barely conscious, she explained. Robert had access to David's pills through their shared business office. He drugged David during their meeting in Iowa City, then followed him onto the highway and waited for the inevitable accident. But that was just the beginning. Documents from the Cedar Rapids Police Department showed Robert had been questioned about David's death, but provided an alibi. He was home with his wife Carol, watching a movie. Carol had confirmed the story under oath. We now believe Carol was coerced into lying. Detective Williams continued. We found evidence in her medical records of multiple injuries consistent with domestic violence. Broken ribs, black eyes, a fractured wrist. All explained away as accidents or clumsiness. Robert hadn't just killed David Morrison. He'd spent years terrorizing his own wife into compliance. After David's death, Robert had systematically destroyed Rebecca's life. When she tried to regain custody of me, Robert's lawyer had argued she was mentally unstable, producing medical records showing her treatment for depression and anxiety. What the court didn't know, Detective Williams explained, was that Robert had been harassing Rebecca constantly. Anonymous phone calls, threatening letters, men following her home from work. She was traumatized because he was actively traumatizing her. Every time Rebecca had found stable employment or housing, Robert would somehow sabotage it. A call to her employer suggesting she was unreliable. A complaint to her landlord about noise or property damage. Anonymous tips to child services claiming she was an unfit mother. Even though I was living with Robert, he kept her running, kept her unstable, then used that instability as evidence. She didn't deserve to have you back, Detective Williams said. It was psychological torture designed to maintain control. The surveillance of Rebecca had intensified over the years. Robert had hired private investigators to track her movements, photograph her daily routines, document her relationships. When she'd finally seemed to be building a stable life in Portland, Robert had decided it was time to act permanently. That Rebecca's death wasn't a random home invasion, Detective Williams confirmed. It was a professional hit, staged to look like a burglary gone wrong. The killer knew her security system, her schedule, even which neighbors would be out of town that week. But the most horrifying revelation was still to come. Jessica, we don't think Robert acted alone in any of this. The level of surveillance, the coordination required to track Rebecca across multiple states for decades, the professional nature of her murder. This operation required resources and connections beyond what one man could manage. She showed me bank records indicating regular payments from Robert's accounts to something called Security Consulting Services. Thousands of dollars every month for over 15 years. We've traced this company to a network of former military and law enforcement personnel who provide discreet services to wealthy clients, Detective Williams explained. Surveillance, harassment, intimidation, and when necessary, more permanent solutions. Robert hadn't just been my father's murderer. He'd been the client and financier of a criminal organization that specialized in destroying lives. The man who raised you, who taught you to ride a bicycle and helped you with homework, was responsible for at least 2 murders and decades of stalking and harassment. Detective Williams said gently, I know this is hard to accept, Dad. It wasn't hard to accept. It was impossible to accept. How do you process the fact that every bedtime story, every birthday celebration, every moment of paternal love in your childhood came from the hands of someone who'd killed your real father and terrorized your real mother? Why didn't Rebecca ever tell anyone the truth about what Robert was doing? She tried. Multiple police reports, court filings, even letters to the FBI. But Robert was careful to stay just within the boundaries of legal harassment. And when Rebecca did cross paths with law enforcement, Robert's network made sure her credibility was destroyed. Detective Williams showed me photographs of Rebecca from the past few years, an older woman who looked haunted, constantly looking over her shoulder, fear etched into her face. She lived in terror for over 2 decades because she knew that if Robert ever found out where you were living, he'd use you to hurt her. She stayed away to protect you, even though it broke her heart. There's something else you need to know, Detective Williams said, pulling out a final set of photographs. The person who broke into your house last night, we don't think they were working for Robert's network. The security footage from my neighbor's camera had captured a clear image of the intruder fleeing through my backyard. The person was tall, wearing dark clothing, but moved with the careful precision of someone trying not to cause damage rather than someone destroying evidence. We ran facial recognition on this image, Detective Williams continued, and got a match. The man who broke into your house is Michael Morrison, Rebecca's brother. My world tilted sideways. Rebecca's brother? But why would he? Because he's been trying to protect you for months. Michael Morrison is a former Army Ranger who spent the past year tracking down everyone involved in his sister's death. When he learned Robert was dead, but his network was still active, he started monitoring you, the tire tracks in my driveway, the disabled security cameras, the GPS tracker on my car. That was him. Michael's been running counter-surveillance on you, trying to identify Robert's accomplices who might still pose a threat. The break-in last night happened because he discovered someone else was planning to hit your house tonight, someone much more dangerous. Detective Williams showed me intercepted communications between members of Robert's network. They'd been monitoring me since Robert's death, waiting to see what I'd discover in the workshop. When I'd called the Portland police and started talking to Rebecca's family, they decided I was too much of a risk to leave alive. Robert left very specific instructions in case of his death, she explained. A dead man's switch, essentially. If anything happened to him, his network was supposed to clean up all loose ends, including you, the white Lexus, Mrs. Patterson, the mysterious phone calls. They've been planning your murder for weeks. Michael Morrison broke into your house last night to gather evidence that would prove their involvement, evidence we could use to arrest them before they acted. I thought about the paranoia I'd been feeling, the sense of being hunted and watched. I hadn't been imagining the tire tracks, the surveillance. That was Rebecca's brother trying to protect me, and doing a damn good job of it. Michael's military training probably saved your life multiple times over the past month. But he couldn't keep playing defense forever. Detective Williams leaned forward, her expression deadly serious. Jessica, Robert's network is planning to kill you tonight. They're coming for you, and they're not going to stage it as an accident. They're planning to make you disappear completely. Outside, I heard a car door slam in my driveway. The car door that slammed in my driveway belonged to a black SUV I'd never seen before. Through the kitchen window, I watched as two figures approached the house, Mrs. Patterson and a tall, older man wearing an expensive suit. "Jessica, get away from the window," Detective Williams hissed, pulling me back from the glass. "That's not Elena Patterson. Her real name is Elena Vasquez, and she's a cleaner for Robert's network. A cleaner. Someone who eliminates evidence and witnesses. The man with her is Carl Davis, Robert's younger brother. My blood turned to ice. I had an uncle I'd never known about, and he was here to kill me. Detective Williams was already on her radio, calling for backup, but her voice was tight with concern. "Units are 15 minutes out. We need to get you somewhere safe." Through the window, I watched Carl Davis survey the property with the practiced eye of someone who'd done this before. He was maybe 60 years old, but moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to violence. He pointed toward the workshop, then to the back door of the house. They knew the layout. They'd been planning this for weeks. Mrs. Patterson, Elena, pulled a large duffel bag from the SUV's trunk. Even from a distance, I could see the outline of what looked like weapons and equipment inside. "They're not here to make it look like an accident," Detective Williams murmured. "They're planning to stage a home invasion, kill you, then burn down the house with all the evidence inside. Why now? Why not weeks ago when I first found the workshop?" "Because Robert's life insurance policy has a suicide clause. If he killed himself, the payout would be void. But if his heir died under suspicious circumstances shortly after his death, it would trigger an investigation that might uncover the policy was purchased under fraudulent circumstances." The pieces clicked together. "They need me alive long enough for the insurance claim to process, and they need you dead before you can testify about what you found. Robert's policy was worth $2 million. Carl Davis stands to inherit everything if you die without children or will die." I watched as Carl and Elena split up, Elena heading toward the back door while Carl moved toward the workshop. They were planning to search for evidence first, then eliminate me once they'd secured or destroyed anything that could implicate them. "Detective Williams, there's something you need to know," I said, remembering the GPS tracker I'd found on my car. "I think someone else has been watching this house. Someone who's been trying to protect me." Yes, if summoned by my words. A figure emerged from the shadows near the workshop. Michael Morrison, Rebecca's brother, appeared behind Carl with military precision. But instead of attacking, he held up his hands in a gesture of surrender. "He's not going to attack them," Detective Williams realized. "He's trying to get them to take him prisoner so he can get close enough to disable them." But Carl wasn't interested in taking prisoners. I watched in horror as he pulled a gun from his jacket and aimed it at Michael's chest. That's when Elena kicked in my back door. "Jessica Davis!" she called out in a sing-song voice that chilled my blood. "Time to have a little chat about your father's legacy." Detective Williams pushed me toward the front of the house. "Basement," she whispered. "Hide in the basement and don't come out until you hear police sirens." But I couldn't leave Michael Morrison to die protecting me. He was Rebecca's brother, the only family I had left who'd actually tried to save me. That I grabbed Robert's toolbox from the hallway closet, the heavy metal box I'd seen him carry to countless projects over the years. Inside were hammers, screwdrivers, a cordless drill, and various other implements that could serve as weapons if necessary. "I'm not hiding," I told Detective Williams. "These people destroyed my entire family. I'm not running anymore. If you've ever reached a point where you had to choose between hiding from your problems or facing them head-on, no matter how scared you were, type 'I chose courage' in the comments. What happened next tested every ounce of strength I'd inherited from both my fathers, the one who'd killed for me and the one who'd died because of me." Elena's voice came from the kitchen now, closer. "Jessica, sweetie, I know you're here. Your car's in the driveway," and Carl saw Detective Williams enter through the front door. No point hiding now. Detective Williams had her weapon drawn, positioning herself between me and the kitchen. But we both knew Elena wasn't alone, and backup was still 10 minutes away. Through the front window, I could see Carl forcing Michael toward the workshop at gunpoint. Michael was limping. Carl had hurt him somehow. But he was still moving, still alive. The workshop, I realized. Carl wants something from the hidden room. He's not just here to kill me. He's here to retrieve evidence that could implicate the whole network. That's when I understood Robert's final strategy. Even in death, he'd been playing chess while everyone else played checkers. The evidence in his workshop wasn't just documentation of his crimes. It was insurance against his criminal partners, leveraged to ensure they'd continue protecting his interests even after he was gone. But now that I'd found everything and contacted the police, that evidence had become a liability instead of an asset. Elena. I called out, surprising Detective Williams. I know why you're really here. Do you now? Elena's voice carried amusement. Why don't you enlighten me, sweetheart? You're not here to kill me for the insurance money. You're here because Robert kept records of everything, including what your organization did for him over the years. If that evidence gets to court, everyone goes down with him. Silence from the kitchen. I'd hit a nerve. Robert may have been a monster, I continued, but he was a smart monster. He knew people like you would betray him eventually, so he kept detailed records as protection. Elena appeared in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, gun drawn, but not aimed directly at me. She was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 5'4", with short blonde hair and cold blue eyes that belonged on a shark. You found his insurance files, she said. It wasn't a question. Bank transfers, surveillance reports, even audio recordings of phone calls. 24 years of documentation about murders, stalking, intimidation. All of it pointing back to your network. And where are these files now? Detective Williams stepped forward slightly. In police custody, along with copies in multiple secure locations. Elena's smile was razor sharp. I don't think so. If the police had that kind of evidence, there would already be warrants out for everyone involved. You found the files, but you haven't had time to process them properly yet. She was right. In my panic over discovering Robert's crimes, I'd focused on the emotional devastation rather than the practical implications of the evidence, which means, Elena continued, those files are still in that workshop, waiting for someone smart enough to use them properly. Elena gestured with her gun toward the back door. Let's take a walk, shall we? Carl's waiting for us in your father's little secret room. Detective Williams kept her weapon trained on Elena as we moved through the kitchen, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. Elena was a professional killer with nothing to lose. Detective Williams was a homicide detective trying to protect a civilian. The tactical advantage belonged to Elena. Outside, the night air felt sharp against my skin. The workshop stood maybe 50 yards from the house, its windows glowing with flashlight beams from inside. Carl had Michael on his knees beside the workbench, hands zip-tied behind his back. Family reunion, Carl called out when he saw us approaching. His voice carried the same casual tone Robert used to use when discussing his projects, and the similarity made my skin crawl up close. Carl looked exactly like Robert might have in 20 years. Same angular jaw, same cold eyes, same way of standing that suggested violence was always an option. You know, Jessica, Bobby always said you were smart, Carl continued conversationally. Too smart for your own good, he said, but not smart enough to leave well enough alone. Smart enough to figure out what you and Robert did to my real family. Carl laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Your real family? Honey, Bobby raised you from the time you were 6 months old. He fed you, clothed you, paid for your education, taught you right from wrong. That man was more of a father to you than David Morrison ever could have been. Robert was a murderer. Robert was a businessman who saw an opportunity and took it. David Morrison was weak, content with his small-time construction company and his pretty wife. Bobby had vision. He built an empire. Elena had positioned herself where she could watch both Detective Williams and the approach to the workshop. Professional, careful, but she was also looking at her watch frequently, suggesting this operation had a strict timeline. Carl, we need to get moving, she said. The files first, then clean up. Carl nodded and gestured toward the back wall where I knew the hidden room was located. Jessica, why don't you show us exactly what you found in Bobby's special space? Save us some time. I looked at Michael. still kneeling beside the workbench. His eyes met mine, and I saw something there, not fear but preparation. He was waiting for something, the room's behind the bookshelf, I said, walking toward the back wall. You push on the right side, and it swings open. But as I reached for the bookshelf, I grabbed Robert's cordless drill from the toolbox I'd been carrying. In one quick motion, I spun around and pressed the drill bit against Carl's neck. Drop your gun, or I put a hole in your throat. Carl froze, but Elena's weapon was already trained on Detective Williams. Put down the drill, Jessica, or Detective Williams dies. Stalemate, that's when Michael made his move. Despite having his hands zip-tied behind his back, he lunged sideways into Elena's legs, knocking her off balance. Her shot went wide, shattering a workshop window instead of hitting Detective Williams. Detective Williams dove for cover behind the workbench while I pressed the drill trigger, the bit spinning inches from Carl's carotid artery. You killed my real father, I said, my voice shaking with rage. You terrorized my real mother for 24 years. You destroyed 3 lives so Robert could play house with someone else's family. Jessica, don't, Detective Williams called out. He's not worth it. But I was past rational thought that 28 years of lies, manipulation, and stolen life had crystallized into a single moment of perfect clarity. I could end this. I could make Carl pay for what he and Robert had done to Dio it. Carl whispered, his eyes locked on mine. Pull that trigger. Become just like us. The words hit me like a physical blow. Become just like them. Just like Robert, who'd killed to get what he wanted. Just like Carl, who destroyed families for money. That I pulled the drill away from his throat and stepped back. That's when the police sirens finally reached us. Elena, still on the ground from Michael's tackle, tried to reach for her dropped weapon. Detective Williams was already moving. Her gun trained on Elena's center mast. Don't even think about it, Detective Williams commanded. Carl raised his hand slowly, a thin smile playing at his lips. Smart girl, he said. Bobby would be proud to N.O., I replied, looking him directly in the eyes. Rebecca would be proud. The arrests of Carl Davis and Elena Vasquez triggered the largest organized crime investigation in Iowa's history. Within 72 hours, federal agents had raided 17 locations across 6 states, uncovering a criminal network that had been operating for over 30 years. The evidence from Robert's workshop proved even more valuable than I'd imagined. His insurance files contained detailed records of murders, kidnappings, fraud, and blackmail schemes involving politicians, business leaders, and law enforcement officials. Robert hadn't just been a client of the criminal organization. He'd been their banker and record keeper. Carl Davis was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, extortion, and racketeering. Elena Vasquez faced federal charges for multiple homicides across state lines. Both were denied bail after prosecutors argued they posed an extreme flight risk and danger to public safety. The trial lasted 8 months and dominated national headlines. The Iowa workshop murders, as the media dubbed the case, revealed a level of criminal conspiracy that shocked even experienced prosecutors. Michael Morrison testified about his sister's decades of fear, the constant moving, the looking over her shoulder, the heartbreak of staying away from her daughter to keep both of them safe. His military training had allowed him to track the network's activities, but he'd been fighting a war against a much larger enemy. Rebecca died believing her daughter hated her, Michael told the court during his victim impact statement. She spent 24 years thinking Jessica saw her as the mother who abandoned her, never knowing that Jessica had been lied to about everything. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Carl Davis was sentenced to life in prison without parole for conspiracy to commit murder and racketeering. Elena Vasquez received the death penalty for her role in multiple homicides, including Rebecca's murder. But the most satisfying moment came when the judge ordered the complete forfeiture of Robert's estate. $2 million in life insurance, the house where I'd grown up, his business assets, and various investments. All of it had been purchased with blood money from decades of crime that I donated every penny to the Rebecca Morrison Foundation for Stalking Victims, an organization I established to provide legal assistance, counseling, and safe housing for people being terrorized by obsessive predators. The media attention was overwhelming at first. Every news outlet wanted to interview the woman who'd uncovered her father's double life, who'd been raised by her biological father's killer without knowing it, but I only gave one interview to a reporter from the Cedar Rapids Gazette who'd covered David Morrison's death back in 1999. I want people to understand that evil can hide behind the most ordinary faces, I told her. The man who taught me to ride a bicycle and helped me with homework was responsible for destroying multiple families. We have to trust our instincts when something feels wrong. Even if we can't prove it yet, the reporter asked if I hated Robert for what he'd done. Did I pity him? I answered honestly. He was so obsessed with possessing love that he destroyed any chance of actually experiencing it. He died alone, surrounded by secrets and lies he'd spent decades building. 6 months after the trial ended, I received an unexpected visitor. Carol Davis, the woman I'd called Mom for 28 years, had been living in a nursing home since her Alzheimer's diagnosis 3 years ago. She had moments of clarity now. And during one of them, she'd asked to see me that I knew. She whispered when I sat beside her bed. About David, about Rebecca, about what Bobby did. I was too scared to stop him, too scared to leave him. I thought if I kept quiet, he'd never hurt you two. Why didn't you tell someone? He said he'd kill me and make it look like an accident, just like David. I believed him. Her eyes filled with tears. I failed you, Jessica. I failed Rebecca. I failed everyone. I held her hand as she cried. This woman who'd been as much a victim of Robert's manipulation as anyone else. You were scared, I told her. People do what they have to do to survive. She squeezed my hand. Rebecca would be so proud of the woman you became. So proud. I sold the house in Cedar Rapids without ever spending another night there. Every room held memories that had been poisoned by the truth about Robert's crimes. Michael Morrison helped me pack my belongings, carefully avoiding the workshop that still stood as evidence in ongoing federal investigations. Portland, Oregon became my new home. I wanted to be close to Rebecca's grave, close to the life she'd built while trying to stay safe from Robert's network. The first thing I did was visit Riverside Cemetery, where Rebecca had been buried 8 months earlier. Her headstone was simple. Rebecca Morrison, beloved teacher and mother. I sat beside her grave for hours that first day, telling her everything I'd learned about her life, her sacrifices, her love for a daughter she'd never been allowed to raise. I'm sorry, I believed the lies about you, I whispered to the granite headstone. I'm sorry you died thinking I didn't know how much you loved me. I'm sorry you spent 24 years protecting me from a distance instead of holding me close. The wind rustled through the oak trees surrounding the cemetery, and for a moment, I could almost imagine it was Rebecca's voice telling me that everything was going to be all right. Michael and I had developed an unlikely friendship born from shared trauma and mutual respect. He helped me understand Rebecca's personality, her quirks, her dreams for the future that had been cut short by Robert's final act of vengeance. She kept a diary, Michael told me over coffee one morning. Wrote in it every single day from the time you were born until the day she died. 28 years of thoughts about her daughter. He gave me the diary. 17 volumes of handwritten entries documenting Rebecca's love, her fears, her hopes, and her regrets. Reading her words felt like finally meeting my mother. 28 years too late. The Rebecca Morrison Foundation grew quickly, fueled by donations from people who'd followed the trial and wanted to help other stalking victims. We provided legal assistance, counseling services, and safe houses for people trying to escape obsessive predators. Our first client was a woman whose ex-husband had been tracking her for 3 years, using many of the same tactics Robert had used against Rebecca. We helped her disappear completely, start a new life with a new identity in a place where her stalker could never find her. You saved my life, she told me during our final meeting. Just like your mother tried to save yours. 6 months after moving to Portland. Michael asked me to dinner, not as Rebecca's brother or my protector, but as a man interested in getting to know the woman I'd become despite everything that had been done to me. We took things slowly, both of us carrying scars from Robert's crimes. But gradually, we built something real together, a relationship based on honesty, respect, and genuine care rather than manipulation and control. On the first anniversary of Rebecca's death, Michael and I returned to her grave together. I brought flowers and a letter I'd written telling her about the foundation, about the people we'd helped, about the life I was building in the city where she'd tried to find peace. "I'm Jessica Morrison now," I told her gravestone. "I legally changed my name back to what it should have been all along. I'm your daughter, and I'm proud of that." The sun was setting behind the oak trees, casting long shadows across the cemetery. But for the first time since I'd learned the truth about my past, those shadows didn't frighten me that I was finally home.